Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Rise Above TV, where we are empowering humanity and supporting unity. You're watching Good Grief, where we're meeting loss with presence, one wave at a time. Hosted by Janie Terrazas, the Mindfulness Coach, and Kelvin Chin, an internationally recognized author, meditation expert, and grief and death guide with over 50 years of experience, helping people navigate life's most profound questions. He is the founder and executive director of the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation, the Turning Within Meditation Foundation, and kelvinchin.org, nonprofit platforms dedicated to reducing fear, deepening inner peace, and empowering individuals to live more fully in the present moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Good Grief, where we are meeting loss with presence, one wave at a time. I'm here with Kelvin Chin again, the meditation grief expert teacher. He has been guiding us through some questions that we have about death and grief. And, I called it Good Grief. There is a well-known cartoon called Peanuts, and Charlie Brown used to say, Good Grief. I think it was him that would say that. And I thought, how do we put a spin on like grief is not all bad, like it's a part of life. And if we can open our minds and perspective, it's not to say like, oh, let's just love grief and just ask for it and that kind of thing. It's just more, it is it's like we can't have it, you can't be here on earth without like loss and gain and change and transition, and death is a part of life. And so part of the process of death, right, is that time here is finite, and so hopefully it allows us to enjoy the experience while we're here, in a more enriching, meaningful way. I know the world right now is experiencing grief in a lot of different ways. And I want to say, episode 1 or 2, we touched on the different types of grief. And there's so much with this topic that we can touch on. And in my mind, I had like a number of how many episodes it'd be. And now I realize like it's going to be more than just probably 5 or something. You know what I mean? And today, we wanted to touch on past lives and reincarnation because on the previous episode, I believe is episode 4, we at least introduced the language. We may have even touched on it a little bit in some of the other ones, but I wanted to dedicate an episode or a good chunk of our time, energy, and attention discussing these things. And so I'm gonna hand it over to you. Maybe start with like a definition of it, because I feel like most people have heard of the word, whether they believe in it or not, they have this idea. So how do you describe reincarnation and how that touches on like past life stuff?
Yeah, so let's back up even before that a little bit first and talk about, we're talking about biological death, okay? So in terms of the grief discussion, we're talking about losing a loved one or losing one's own life, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we're not talking about these other types of losses that we've already talked about in previous sessions that somebody could have. So we're talking about biological death right now, okay? And I use the phrase biological. Didn't used to say that. I used to say physical, death or loss of our physical body is the way I used to say. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I talk about it as biological death. Our biological body dies. And you'll see why in a second. But when our biological body dies, one of two things is going to happen. Either our mind is going to continue or it's not going to continue. So when I work with my overcoming the fear of death clients, my clients who come to me with death anxiety or fear of death, I don't tell them that they have to believe in what we're going to talk about today. I don't tell them that they have to believe in heaven. I take them from wherever they're at. And so I tell them right off the bat, that's one of two things is going to happen when we biologically die. Our mind's going to continue or it's not going to continue. If it does not continue, our mind does not continue after our body biologically dies. Just live our life. It's like then what's the point of fearing death? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's easy to say, but people still fear death. It's typically ranked number one, number two on the list of all fears. But if we do continue after we biologically die, I my work, my nonprofit work, is to help people reduce their fears about anything, including that. And therefore, they're not going to continue taking fears with them into heaven, which is possible. And that happens with people because you
Mhm.
still take your fears and your personality with you. You take your baggage, if you have baggage, and we all have some baggage, we take it with us into heaven. Okay, get out.
Right, which maybe kind of ties to that word karma, but you could touch on that in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole other
Subject.
pitch. Yeah, but no, when I'm using the word mind, I don't just mean that conscious thinking mind that is obsessing about what you're doing at work or with your family or whatever. That's part of our mind, but that's a tiny part of our mind. Our mind is huge. I use that Houston Astrodome analogy for those of you who've read anything in my books and or my work. That it's like we're not this little 8-inch bucket sitting down on the 50-yard line with a 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 ping pong balls bouncing in and out. The ping pong balls are like your thoughts and emotions. No, the mind is huge. It's this huge football stadium. It seats 100,000 people, but you just don't know it because it's at night. You're in there. Imagine yourself, picture it. You're at night. There's no lights on, and there's this little desk lamp over this 8-inch bucket down the 50-yard line, and you think that's it. No, I teach my students how to turn on the light switches on the rest of the football stadium, which is their mind. Then they start experiencing what we can refer to as expansion of consciousness, or the phrase I tend to use now is expansion of their conscious capacity of their mind, because their capacity is bigger and they're conscious within that capacity. So that's the phrase I tend to use. But no, we're not just talking about that little conscious part of our mind that most people are walking around with, and they're born, they live their whole life, and they die just living out of that 8-inch bucket. Most people are living very, very limited lives, really. They don't realize how limited the experience of their life is until they start doing what I teach, and then they start expanding their capacity. They start realizing, whoa, all this anxiety that I've been experiencing is unnecessary. Much of it is self-inflicted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. And it's an adjustment. Like when you start to, it's almost like it's a titration. I think that's the word that they use, or it's an appropriate word to use in this case, where as you expand that and a person's sensory neurons, start to really take in, and that bigger part of their mind starts to come into play in their reality. The brain and the body kind of is like, whoa, and
Yeah,
so
got to get
helping them
used to it.
yeah, you got to get used to
Got to get
all of
used
that
to it.
extra feeling and seeing and sensing and knowing and all of that,
All
Anyway,
of that. Yeah, and it's gradual over time.
yes.
But so yeah, so thanks for raising that. Mine, so I have clients in 70 countries, so I tend to use plain English language, mind. So, but you could substitute soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness, same thing. So we biologically die, our mind, our consciousness continues. And as Janie said, our memories go with us. We still remember who we are. We still remember who our loved ones were and so forth. We die. We're on the other side. Um, we take our mind with us. But then what happens? You can hang out in heaven for as long as we want, okay? And it's a very easy, I describe it as it's like vacation. It's like being on vacation. You don't have a physical biological body. So you don't have to worry about health. You don't have to worry about clothing, shelter, all of that. But
Oh,
what's
awesome.
continuing is our mind. And what is the mind then? It's not biological. That would be your brain. Your brain is now dead and gone. Um, what continues is our energy. Mind is energy. Our mind is energy. We are energy. And so the energetic personality, you could say, our energetic individuality continues. So we don't merge into some cosmic soup. Sometimes you'll hear people say that. And I say, well, that makes no logical sense. Who's the medium talking to? Sometimes I've heard mediums say that, tell lectures, tell big audiences of people, never mind their individual clients, that they merge with something when they die. You don't merging means losing individuality. Now, maybe they're using the wrong English.
Yeah, like maybe that's what they mean. Like, hey, you're merging into the more universal, right? No body, more expansiveness. But like you're saying, if they're not explaining that when you're referring to the mind that encapsulates that persona that had this lifetime, like on the other side, and it takes that, with them, to me, it's almost like a memory bank. Like the memory bank from each life carries on over and it becomes this amalgamation that continues to retain an individuality, even though it's not in a body. And
But
it's like in the ether, you could say. It's
yeah,
still
that,
somehow, and that's the part that's so mysterious.
yeah, that's so the part there, the key word that you said is individuality.
Hmm.
Individuality is retained. You keep your individuality. You're not,
In the singular, in the, yeah, universal
but you're
singular.
not, you're not, think of it this way. Don't think of heaven as some ether thing, like you said.
Yeah.
Think of it like right now. Do you have individuality here on planet Earth?
Mm,
Do you think of the air that we're breathing as some ether? Some people do use that phrase, that
sure,
we're
sure.
living here on planet Earth in
Yeah.
some ether atmosphere. And you can say
It's
that.
just a dimensionality thing.
It's just a vibrational issue.
People think it's like this world and heaven, and then that's it. And it's like, right? And you're saying, no, it's so much more complex.
No, it's integrated.
Yes.
And I simplified it. I don't think of it as complex. I think of it as
Okay.
very simple, just like this place here, except it's made of energy. So you
Hmm.
can still have a book there, but
Yeah.
it's made of energy. Well,
Yeah.
this is made of energy, isn't it? Isn't this
Yeah.
made of molecules and atoms? That's what energy is. So it just tends to be vibrating at a more slower. I don't like to use the word lower. It's to mean not as
I
good.
understand why we want to be mindful of. That's why I don't even like to say good and bad. I use
Exactly.
generative and degenerative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even
Because
like positive and negative, people spun that in a certain way. So we're
yeah,
trying, once again, part of this work that we're doing is to help people not have shame. And so, anyway, yeah,
exactly. And exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So this is vibrating at a slower, these atoms and molecules, when I say this, the
yes,
atoms and molecules making up this book are vibrating at a slower rate than an energetic book that's made of atoms and molecules still on the other side, except I think much smaller than atoms and molecules than we. I think these fundamental particles of the universe have not yet been discovered. I think they're much
yeah,
smaller, but
yeah,
they think they act just like atoms and molecules. Quantum mechanics physicists who really understand quantum mechanics would tell
yeah,
you that most of the doctors out there, Chopra and others who are not quantum mechanics experts, would
right.
they would tell you these guys are just conflating and confusing quantum mechanics to try to explain something that is I think incorrect. So here's this
Right.
fundamental thing. When we biologically die, our mind continues and our mind is still material. That is not what most spiritual people will tell teachers will tell you. They'll
Mhm.
say it's virtual. They'll use this word. That's why Chopra and others they talk about the mind being virtual in heaven. So they got to come up with these concocted theories using supposed quantum mechanics incorrectly to try
Mhm.
to jury rig this virtual mind concept. No, the mind is not virtual. The mind is material on the other side. It's not biological. That's why I started changing my language and start saying when we I don't say when we physically die. I say when we biologically die.
Mhm.
Because if you ask a physicist on if light and energy is physical, they would say yes. Light is measurable, it's identifiable, it's a physical thing. Now,
Yes.
most people on the street, and like Chopra, they don't consider light physical,
Right.
but
And you
it
know what?
is. It's
Yeah.
material. It's
Yes.
material is the word that I use. It's measurable. And therefore, that explains more rationally and clearly without needing to jury rig these theories why mediums can still talk to an individual on the other side who's dead
Hmm.
because their individuality is still material in the form of energy and light, and they still have memory and personality. That's why when the dead loved one comes to you and they laugh, tell you a joke, you recognize their personality if they had a sense of humor. That's
Hmm.
why if they, on the other hand, if they come to you and they're incredibly serious and they would never had a sense of humor as a personality, you recognize them. Oh, that's Grandpa. He never could tell a joke, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And even like we were saying before, how senses, like our smell or certain tastes, like how is that coming through, right? Right.
I am a concept guy in terms of understanding things so that because I teach my students how to look for what's called cognitive dissonance. That means ideas that don't make sense together. And the idea that there is a beginning and then eternity after that makes no logical sense because
None.
eternity means no beginning and no end. Now,
Exactly.
now you can say that there was a beginning to planet Earth. That's okay. But you can't say that there's a beginning to the universe in the way I define universe as everything. Now, some people will
Yeah.
say, well, there's multiple universes. Like, to me,
It's
that's
kind of like all of it. Like if there's like gazillions of Milky Ways and da 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 dee da da,
exactly,
like
exactly.
anything and everything that's
That's
visible,
everything.
that's giving a pulse or like a sound, or I don't care
Everything
how
that
many light years
exists,
away. It's
not just even that's visible. I'm
no,
saying that
yeah,
everything that exists
yes.
in
And
what I
even the
call
blackness, even the void.
everything that exists in what I call the continuum of change. That's how I define universe. Now, if you define universe that way, then everything has to make sense within that universe. And the way I think of things, they all make sense to me. But
Yeah,
so eternity means that which is uninfluenced by the continuum of change. So it is, there's no, so time is a measurement of the continuum of change. It's a measurement. Time is a measurement. So when sometimes you'll hear people will also say time doesn't exist in heaven. No, time exists because time, they don't understand the definition of time. Time
hmm,
is a measurement of change. Does change exist in heaven? Well, yes. How do you know that? Because individuality exists in heaven. How do you know that? Who's the medium talking to? They're not talking to cosmic soup. They're talking to individual minds that are still existing after the biological body dies. Okay?
hmm,
That's how you know. And so time is just an arbitrary measurement. Why do I say arbitrary? Because sometimes you can measure time in seconds, in minutes, hours. You could say there's 12 months in a year. In ancient Roman times, they said there were 10 months in a year. So that's arbitrary how you measure it. But it's just simply measurement of the change that we experience. That's
hmm,
all time is. So
yeah,
sometimes people will get confused and they'll say, oh, but time is different, da 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 da. You know, like I'm on vacation and time didn't exist. No, time still existed when you were on vacation. It just seemed to go faster because you weren't paying attention to showing up at your job. You were just hanging out on the beach. But
yeah,
but still with stuff was still growing and things still individually existed in that Hawaii universe that you were in. It wasn't that all of a sudden the plants around you didn't stop, all of a sudden stopped growing. No, they still continued to change. So
yeah.
time still existed. So those are simple like confusions that I see a lot. And you hear people ask this all the time. But
Okay.
what happened before the beginning? If there's no beginning and end, what happened for the beginning? No, no, no.
No.
You're conflating two ideas. Either
Yes.
eternity means no beginning and no end. That means that things have been recycling over and over and over again forever, not since the beginning, because there is no beginning.
No, it just, and
It's
I think that's
very
what
difficult for people to get. So
here,
we need to dwell on this because this is very difficult for people to get their minds around. It was difficult for me to get my mind around when I first started.
okay, well, let's hop to going back to, let's see, where we were trying to help people understand, at least from where
Past
we're coming
lives.
from. mind and soul and all that on the other
mind
side.
and soul, and then let's go to past lives. So
Yes.
you're in heaven, you're there as long as you want to. You don't have to come back here to Earth or to any other planet. I have lifetimes on other planets too, and I think many people probably have,
Mhm.
but and they may not remember it. But you don't have to come back in a biological form. But when you want to, if you want to, you can. Okay. So what is that based on? First law of thermodynamics is the what I think of. That means energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Okay? So this marries up well with the what we just talked about for a little bit there about no beginning and no end. Eternity, the notion of eternity. Again, very abstract idea, but maybe this is more easy for people to get their mind around. First law of thermodynamics says energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So, what does it do? The energy just changes form. If I take this pad of paper and I burn it, what does it do? I light a fire to it. It changes this pad of paper into what? Ashes, heat, different chemicals, smoke. So, if you actually captured all of that and the energy, the heat is energy, then you would conserve all of that, which is now this.
Yeah,
Okay,
which I think that's one of the laws is law of conservation.
it's the same thing. Law of
Yes.
conservation is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy,
Okay, okay. Oh, I see. That's right. And it breaks it down.
it's this, yeah, it's the same. It's another name for the same exact same thing.
Okay, got it, got it.
Energy.
And I love that. I love there's nothing goes to waste. There's I'm gonna put a link to this one video I saw the other day, and it was in a really cool way breaking down what happens when a body is cremated.
Yeah,
And it goes through all this, like you have to have the patience to get through all of it, but I'm into chemistry and physics and all this stuff.
yeah,
And even then, it's like the carbon and the hydrogen and what happens to it, nothing is not reused again.
yeah.
It's incredible, even though it looks like it disappears. It's
Now that
amazing.
now that's the physical aspect of this.
Right, that's just the
But when
physical, not
you
the
biologically die,
mm-hmm.
energy continues because we are energy.
Yes.
And so then we're on the other side. And that's why I call my book After the Afterlife, because you got heaven is the afterlife, right? But
Yeah.
I thought of this and I thought, well, I'm going to call this After the Afterlife because after the afterlife, then what? Then you can have a future life. So I talk about my memories going back 6,000 years here in this book. My memories go back now 8,000 years. But in the book, when I wrote the book a few years ago, it was only 6,000 years. And these are past life memories. But after the afterlife is a future life, right?
Mm,
And so that's why I help my clients get rid of their fears because then we get rid of our fears permanently so that we have less and less fear, fewer and fewer fears as we go forward in our future lives. And
yes.
so that's the idea of reincarnation. You're taking on a new physical form, and your energy, your soul, your consciousness, your mind, your spirit, whichever way you want to, whatever you want to call it, goes into a new physical form, potentially in a new culture, in a new country, maybe on a new planet. It just whatever. You can do that. You can take on a new biological form. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Your
And
physical energy form, which again, like I said earlier, the physicists would still consider that a physical energetic body in heaven,
mhm.
takes on a biological form, can take on a biological form if it wants to later.
I
But
was curious, how did they start to come to you? Because I know there's like regression, and for you, it wasn't even that way. I think it might have just happened in meditation. Like there's so many different ways. It's not just one way that a recall or a memory of a past life comes. So I wanted to know what that looked like for you, and then what are the different ways?
yeah,
And then I have a feeling people might wonder, well, how do I know for sure it was an actual memory from a
right,
lifetime versus just some other, like when you have a dream and you see yourself in, some of the Sahara Desert riding a
right,
camel, it's like,
right,
were
right,
you? You know what I mean? So
exactly.
hopefully that's true. not too bulky there. Okay.
Yeah, no, no, no. So here's the thing. There are many ways that memories appear, whether we're talking about past life memories or these kind of memories, just memories from one's lifetime, this lifetime. You
Hmm.
know, you could say going to a therapist will help you remember stuff, right?
Mm.
In this
Mm.
lifetime I'm talking about, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
and that's really what a past life regressionist is doing with you is kind of opening up memories in that way to maybe to a past life. Uh,
Hmm.
it's no different. But in my case, as you said, I didn't have any help. I didn't believe in reincarnation. Okay, so start there. I did not believe in heaven. I did not believe in reincarnation. I used to make fun of the people who would talk about it at meditation retreats. I'd hear them talking about it in the food line or something at the dining hall or something. And I'd yeah, yeah, see, let's go sit at this other table away from these crazy people. So I didn't believe in it until I started having experiences that I couldn't explain any other way. Okay. And we can talk about that. But, I get into it in detail in this book, but we can, talk about a few of the beginning ones if we want to here. But to answer your question about how do you know if it's not just your imagination? I get that question all the time, right? How do you know you're not just making it up, right? I said, so what did I'm reading from my book here on page
Okay.
155, if
Okay.
anybody has the book. So what did I start to look at to get a better sense if my past life experiences were real or imaginary, right? Because I was born with you know, I call it born with it skepticism, born
Mm.
with skepticism. That's me. I questioned everything, right? And then especially when past life memories. Well, think of any memory, just kind of segue from experiences that everybody has had. Everybody's had memories of this lifetime, some of their stuff that's happened in this lifetime. And you get together with one of your siblings or your parents or your uncles or your aunts or your cousins or whoever, and you'll say, well, wait a minute, is this what happened? And you'll kind of compare notes. So first of all, there's no absoluteness to this about right and wrong. Like, because you get two people together, like, wait a minute, no, 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 we didn't we didn't go to that 7-Eleven, or we weren't in that part of the city. We went to this other place, whatever. And you get there's always some questionable stuff there. But
Yeah,
that
because it's subjective, right? Memories.
yeah, your memory is faulty, and my memory is just equally fault can be as equally as faulty as anybody else's. So there's no proving this stuff, right? But you can kind of get an idea, especially if you had three other people who went with you to that city, and you went out to the club together and dancing and this and that, and three of the four people are saying, no, no, this is what happened, and the other person saying, oh, that's not the way I remember it. It's probably the three people are probably. So that's what I suggest that people look at stuff like that in terms of their past life memories similarly. Okay. So
Hmm.
I break it down here in this page right here. If you can read this, you can kind of read it real quickly
Kind of
yourself.
blurry, but yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
that somebody could
Yeah, they could zoom in and pause and pick it
zoom in
out.
and pause it and read it. So basically, I'm not going to read this whole thing.
Sure.
But I talk about this this is towards the middle of the end, the last half of my book. I get into this. How can you tell imagination or real? Right? And so
Yeah.
I look at several things. One is the emotional element. Okay, what's the emotional feel that you have about this memory that you think might be a memory? You're not sure if it's a memory or if you're making it up. It's your imagination. There's really strong emotion with it. It's more likely. Again, there's no absolute proving any of this stuff because
Hmm.
these are experiences that we're interpreting. Okay.
Hmm.
So emotion, another element to look at is the sensory element. What do I mean by that? What you've talked about, smell, taste, sight, hearing. How rich are the senses in this memory that you're having? How real does it feel? as you could say. You could just sum that one up. But how real does it feel emotionally and sensory wise? And another element is what I call the third party element, which is the example I just gave about going in this lifetime, going to the club. Remember when we were, in college and we went back, this is like, 20, 30 years ago, when we were in college and we went to this club, blah, blah, blah. And you're talking to 3 or 4 or 5 friends who went with you, and 3 or 4 of them are agreeing that this happened, and another 1 or 2 people say, no, this happens. The 3 or 4 probably right. That's
Right. They're a little more, they might be, you can maybe lean more on that accuracy.
for. It's again,
Yeah.
it's no absoluteness here.
Right.
You're not absolutely sure. But that's what I call the third party element. In other words, it's not you. So do you have something that's external to you that's telling you that of something that you don't know? Like, for example, past life wise, I've had experiences. I didn't know there were memories at first. I've had experiences of knowing how to say stuff that I was saying. Kelvin Chin in 20th and 21st century Kelvin Chin, because it started to me, in the 20th century when I was much younger. It was, I'm gobbledygooking. Gobbledygook? Just saying gibberish. I'm just saying stuff. I don't know what I'm saying. And then later I realized, oh, I'm speaking ancient Hebrew. I'm speaking, you know, uh, Sumerian from 6,000 years ago. I never even studied Sumerian. I never read about that. I didn't study it in history or anything. I didn't know a language. I'm speaking in different languages. And then I spoke in Lakota, which is people refer to it as Sioux.
Lakota, Dakota.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lakota. People don't know, Sioux is a detrimental term. The Sioux they don't call themselves Sioux. They're the Lakota tribe. Okay.
Mm.
And the quick side note on that, I put that in my book here about my Lakota memories. But a quick note on that is the reason Sioux came up as a name that was associated with them because of I don't know whether it was a 16th, 15th, 17th century or 18th century French
Mm.
traveler, trapper is traveling in the Midwest of North America now, US now, what we call the Midwest. And he said, what's the name of the tribe over there? And he asked this certain tribe, I can't remember which tribe it was, but they asked them, what's that tribe? And they said, oh, that's the Sioux. And Sioux in that language meant like snake people or something. It was a very derogatory
Oh,
term.
wow.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so now everybody calls them the Sioux because of that French trapper who was told this, and then he popped and went back and he started telling people. But no, you talk to anybody from that nation of Native Americans, they're
Mhm.
Lakota. So anyway,
Yeah.
I start speaking in Lakota. I'm like, I don't know Lakota. And I started speaking, and then I looked it up on the internet, and I was talking about going fishing and this and that. And Lakota, I was like, what? Anyway, so that's an example of a third party element. Another example that just happened to me recently, third party, in,
Hmm.
in 2020, I met this guy on Facebook. His name's William Baldridge. And in my book, it's called The William Baldridge Story. I talk about it in my book here. But I met this guy. The short version is I met this guy on Facebook because he used to teach meditation like I did back when we were in their 20s. So I met this guy on Facebook because we both used to teach meditation. I did not know him. He was on the West Coast. I was on the East Coast teaching meditation. I never met this guy till 2020 on Facebook. He starts hearing about my past lives. And he thought, oh, that's interesting. And he called me up on the phone. We're talking about it after one of my classes or one of my lectures. And he said, you know about the Charlie Lutz story, right? And I said, no, what are you talking about? And he goes, this is this guy, Charlie Lutz, in 1973 was talking about me, in 1973, 4 years before I had any past life memories. I said, what? I never met Charlie Lutz. I didn't, never heard his lectures. Da, da, da. Turns out Charlie Lutz, I mean, I knew who he was. He was part of the spiritual arm of the TM organization that I used to be part of for 10 years back when I was in my 20s, right? And then
Transcendental
I left.
meditation.
I left when I went to law school, and then I left and I teach what I call turning within meditation. I removed all the cultural stuff. But
Mhm.
he was the leader of the spiritual arm. So I was in a different arm teaching meditation, and I was in the education, sports, business, teaching in schools and businesses and so forth. We had nothing to do with the spiritual arm because businesses, you imagine going into a Fortune 500 company and saying, "Hey, you want to hear about past lives? We're going to tell you about past lives." I was like, "What? We're going to tell you about heaven." No, get out of here. So we were talking about productivity and teaching meditation to improve productivity. So we were told by the head of our arm of the organization, do not talk to anybody in that arm of the organization. Do not pollute your mind with any of that spiritual stuff. So anyway, this guy, William Baldridge, tells me in 2020 that he thought that I had shared my past lives with this guy, Charlie Lutz, and that's why he was talking about me in 1973. I said, that was 4 years before I had my first memory. I didn't know any of this stuff. And Charlie Lutz evidently had been giving lectures in weekly in Los Angeles, and somebody asked him a question about past lives. And he didn't mention my name, Kelvin Chin, but
Mm.
he described two personalities that I had memories of later. And he said, and this guy, this soul, he said, didn't this guy, he didn't say this guy, this soul is currently here on planet Earth and is a teacher in our organization now.
W. I just dropped the TF now. It's just like, what?
Right, right.
What'd you talk about, Willis?
I know. I was like, what? You know,
That.
his nickname is Widge now. I call him Widge. Widge. I said, what? And he goes, oh yeah. You didn't tell Charlie Lutz that? I said, no, I never talked to him. We were told not to even look at his lectures,
Wow.
never mind meet the guy. We couldn't, I never heard any
Interact.
of his tapes, nothing.
Yeah.
So
That
yeah, I would
it
have gotten fired if I had any knowledge of what Lutz was doing. Anyway, yeah, so I just heard about that in 2020. Pretty crazy.
I wanted to touch on there was a lot that you had mentioned and that I can relate to and connect to, like for example, language. There was like I kept hearing Hebrew. Well, I didn't know it was Hebrew, but I could hear it phonetically, and it was the closest language that I could maybe relate it to. So it was kind of more of a guess. Um, and then I would try my best to write it down like the way I was hearing it, and then do my best to type it right phonetically online. And then eventually it started pulling things up. And that's when I was like, whoa, like I'm getting Hebrew. And what was really neat is a lot of times at the time where I would get some sort of a word or like a statement, the very first thing I ever heard was Baruch atah Adonai Elohim. Now I know Elohim is like, but I didn't even know exactly how to spell it, but and then when I looked it up, I think it's like blessed be the creator of the universe. And I was like, wow, that's like so cool. And then I would hear other words and I would start looking it up and I was seeing the etymology of them and it was helping me learn a lot. But what I was going to say was at the time, in terms of meditation, what I was going through and what I was studying and learning just through my know thyself journey and doing my best to really try to figure out like what is life and what is God and what am I and why am I here? And you start asking all these deep questions. And I started getting into that like in around 2011 and what you seek, you shall find, right? So I understand. Oh, and then I started getting these flashes of times what felt like Egyptian, like in Egypt.
Mm,
And there were some of my past life memories that I was getting were not always super pleasant. And it was because at the time I was healing traumas and God was almost helping me understand that cellular memory and that imprint of like lives and other lives and how that electromagnetically in this lifetime, it's like within us, you know? I don't know if I'm doing a good job describing that. But with that being said, I
yeah.
think because I was wanting to heal my sex trauma, it was taking me back into lifetimes where I remember one time, And again, you were talking about the senses. And that's why I was like, when I would get sort of zipped back, and this was just on my own, like sometimes I was just like in a awakened state. And then something would hit me, and all of a sudden I felt like I was in a different time and place. And then all of a sudden I was back here again. But wherever I just was, it was I could smell and taste the dust, and I could see what people were wearing. And I couldn't see myself from the outside, but I could look down and realize, like, oh, I'm in a male body. And, like, and pieces of a time, what it felt like around the time of Yeshua. And I was like really getting deep into his teachings at the time. That was when I met you, and you were telling me about some of what you were experiencing in some of your lifetimes, and like what you were remembering about a time maybe where you were alive when Jesus was alive, or at least in a time where his message was still like not tainted.
Yeah.
And the things that he was, or that Jesus was sharing with you was similar to information that I felt I was also getting in some of these spaces and places. And so that was helping me validate it. But I like that you were saying, you were giving all the different examples of what can make you feel like it's not just like an imagination type of thing. And I do feel in this really interesting way that when I was getting zipped into these lifetimes, what felt, and again, there's only been like three, but I feel the locations and the time is very similar. It's almost like taking me there so I can regain information, right, and then bring it back with me, and then acclimate it, and how do I put that into practice in my life, which I thought was really cool. But because I was healing my sex trauma, one of the times I said was like, I remember sort of being like, I remember feeling the wall kind of just being wet and all these stones, and sort of having like a chain in my hand. And I feel like there was like this man that would come through, and he owned all these like female slaves, and he would just do what he wanted with us when he wanted. And there was probably only two kind of memories of that happening. And then another time, this is going back to Lakota. I started getting like Lakota stuff and visualizations and things that I was doing, wanting to do with my hands when I was working on people. It was almost like I was being guided. And then in this really weird, cool way, things were coming into my life. Like I was renting a house, and I found this book in the garage, and it was about Native Americans, and I had never heard of Lakota Dakotas, and there was 2 pages about the Lakotas in there. And then about 2 weeks after that, I had mentioned to my mom about this, and I was like, there's something about this connection. And then like 2 days later, she was like, oh my God, I got this book of poems in my mailbox, and on the back it said Lakota Dakota. And I was like, again, these are all just like things that kind of occur sometimes after these past lives would come in, almost to give me this reassurance that it's like a legitimate thing.
So there's a bunch of stuff I want to comment on. So this
Yeah.
last thing that you just described about the mailbox and the poems coming in and so forth, um, that could easily be
Uh-huh.
somebody whispering to somebody here, and you getting this book up. So people wonder, how does this stuff happen? And I've experienced that similar things that we tend to view as coincidences. Sometimes they are coincidences. Coincidences can happen just by accident, okay? But sometimes things like this seem to be intentional. And they're and whispers, I call them whisperings.
Me too. Divine whispers or divine winks.
Whispers can happen from the other side. It could be your dead grandmother. It could be an old friend. It could be an old teacher. It could be any being who's on the other side. Could whisper to somebody to have sent you this book. So anyway, I just want to make that comment. The other thing is, you mentioned something which reminded me. Why does who cares about this past life stuff? What's the so what? It's the answer to the so what question. And to me, as like you said, you implied this, which is for us to learn how to help ourselves live more comfortably, fully, with less stress and less trauma in the present. It doesn't matter who we were. I mean, it may matter to us individually, but who cares? It's cocktail party talk. I've been some known characters through history. A few, not most of my 25, 26 lifetimes I have memories of. It's just, an Egyptian priest several times here and there, ancient Egypt, so forth. But, so what? It's the what can we learn about ourselves to help us today? That's the key, in my opinion. The ancient Egyptian lifetime I also had, that one came, this goes to one of our earlier questions of how these things can get resurfaced. I was literally on a massage table getting massaged by a massage therapist professionally, she happened to be the wife of a good friend of mine. She's a massage therapist also. So I was over at their house and I'm getting massaged, and for whatever reason, body consciousness memory, so to speak, you carry it around with you energetically. Obviously, this is a different body than it was in ancient Egypt, but for some reason, the energetics of whatever she was doing, I had this flash. And from then on, I started having flashes of this certain experience. I talk about it in my book from ancient Egypt. Um, you also mentioned the idea of not super pleasant experience sometimes, and that
Sometimes.
can happen. And I tell my students, be careful what you wish for, because you know you don't need to have past life memories in order to fully develop. You can still work through your trauma and your old emotional patterns by looking at your emotional patterns that you have now,
Mhm.
because they're more than likely connected to past lives and ancient and old emotional patterns you have in this lifetime and potentially other lifetimes in the past. So
Yeah.
work on your emotional patterns. You don't need to dig up all your past life memories, especially the trauma stuff.
Exactly. And I think the reason why those memories at the time, like if they were actually like real, right, which felt real to me, um, it was because I was seeking to get to the root of any of my sex trauma so I could clear all of that stuff out
Yeah,
so that I didn't keep attracting situations and people that were going to make me feel there's these five soul wounds. I don't know if you've heard of them. Abandonment, rejection, humiliation, injustice, and betrayal. They tend to be very common wounds and they each have like symptoms. And so for me, it was that humiliation and all
yeah,
that kind of stuff. So I like you said, be careful what you wish for. If you want to go into past lives, you never know what you're going to see. But for
yeah.
me, I guess because I was setting that intention, it was coming through.
Exactly. And that's fine. And
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not criticizing what you did. I'm just,
No, I don't think you were either. I
no,
was
I'm
just wanting to
making it
clarify for
clear to
people.
people. Yeah,
Yeah,
making it clear to the people who are listening as,
yes.
as we're sharing these experiences from a teaching perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just because, look, I've had traumatic past life memories, very traumatic past life memories, but they don't re-traumatize me. So that's the only cautionary note I would just say. You were not re-traumatized by it. You were freed up from it. Okay, fine. Same thing with me. But it's just, people just got to be aware of that issue. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
And I
Uh,
think too, a lot of the studying and the work that we had already been doing in meditation and a combination of a lot of things that when these things started happening to us, we were able to make sense of them more or less and able to surrender and take the good, even if it was unpleasant. It was almost like we could understand the wisdom and the point
exactly.
of us even like getting it. The other thing, and it touches on this, going back to Lakota, there was probably two or three memories where I was like about an 8 or 9 year old Native American girl, and my whole life, I've had this, and I don't know if I'll show it because I'm like really embarrassed about this indention that I have between my boobs here. It's like my breastplate has this crazy ass indention in it, the bone. And that might be called something for other people. They might have one, but I always wondered why it was like that. And then as I got a little bit older, I heard this really cool thing about, oh, birthmarks or weird markings that you have on your body or things with your bone or whatever sometimes can be from a wound from a past life. Well, I
That's
had heard that when I was like a teenager, but whatever, just didn't really think about it. Fast forward into this space and time now, right? As an adult, and I'm in all this stuff. Um, I don't want to get into the details of it, but one of the lifetimes it had to do with when I was that little 9-year-old girl and I was on a table and
Mm,
there was these men all dressed in black, almost like they look like pilgrims almost.
mm,
And they were speaking not my language, but in a weird way in the memory, I was kind of sensing and understanding what was happening.
mm.
And I felt like it was pretty scary. And then all of a sudden, I saw one of them pull out this big ass Bowie knife, brah.
Whoa,
And I'm like laying on a fucking table.
whoa,
And I could tell there was, I know this sounds a little bit strange, but not so much, maybe especially with all this weird Epstein shit. Um, it was like I was the daughter of the tribe, and there was like some sort of spiritual something with me, and they wanted to get like my heart out of my chest.
whoa.
Oh my God, brah. Now, keep in mind, let me rewind a little bit. Before this, when this memory came to me, I was actually making love, right? With
Oh
my
my
ex-husband.
God. Oh my
And it
God.
didn't happen during it. It happened right after I had like my orgasm.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, and I was like laying on the bed and I had my orgasm and then it took me there. Now keep it also at this time, I
Whoa.
was understanding the sacredness of sex and how it really is a portal for meditation and healing and like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And clearing and all kinds of cool stuff. That's like a whole nother subject in itself. So I know this might be a little TMI, but it was so freaky for me and
Yeah.
sad, brah. So like I'm like, oh, I just had my orgasm, and then all of a sudden I'm in that space,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's all happening to me. I'm probably gonna show my bone here in a second. I don't know if I'll put it in the clip, okay? But I'm gonna show it to you. And dude, maybe this is like exposure therapy for me.
I
I never
know
wear
exactly.
bathing suits. I all my bathing suits are always tube. I never
Whoa.
yeah. So anyway, um, that happens. I'm
That's
there. The
sick.
knife comes into my chest
Oh,
in the memory. And as soon as that happens, I come back into this lifetime and I gasp for air, like it was so trippy. And I can
your
only
husband must
imagine.
have been freaking out
I,
too.
that's what I was gonna say. Ready? I I I knew he was right. He was probably like, "Whoa!" And all I could get out of my mouth was, I think I did my finger like this and was just kind of like, "Just give me 1 second," because I'm gonna cry thinking about. Ugh. It was like it was so much to process, and and what was kind of sad, but we're not together anymore. And this was one of the reasons was there was no like curiosity. There was no holding safe space for me. Even after I was able to get to a place to share, I'm the kind of person that like he just, and it's okay because I'm sure a lot of people experience this or that are like this. He didn't have that empathetic awareness
Yeah.
to like just like soothe me. And of
You
course, there
can
was nothing
hold
that he
you.
could say. Yeah, or just something. You know what I mean? I don't really recall him doing that. As a matter of fact, at this time, there was a lot of really crazy things happening to me and metaphysical things happening to me. And I thought that he was like my friend. And so I was like sharing all this stuff with him,
Yeah.
not really, always feeling like a dismissiveness
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But if for some dumb reason, I kept like sharing all these things with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't know, whatever it was, like it wasn't trying to make myself special or anything like that. But here I'm going to show you the way the bone looks. And in a way, I kind of believe like, oh my God, this is really what happened.
Yeah. That makes
And
sense.
yeah, and
Yeah, we
actually,
definitely carried stuff like that. In
yeah,
our energetically, we can carry it and it can manifest in our current physical biological body.
yeah, and I think God showed me that, and I went there and I had to like live it out again so
Well,
that I could take my power back. Like
yeah,
I did whatever I could at that time with the
yeah,
awareness that I had,
yeah,
and like prayed and was just like healing my body,
yeah,
trying to get to a place of appreciating that sort of what in my mind is like a small deformity. Um,
yeah. It's probably
Yeah, she was really cool. And then this is what's even crazier. Fast forward, when I started to find a person who did energy work, she had the gift of being able to see things. And she literally saw, and I didn't tell her anything.
Yeah.
She was the one that brought up Lakota Dakota. She brought up seeing me as a just, and it just solidified everything for me. And
Yeah.
I have mad respect for Native American at the
Yeah.
time too. I was
Yeah.
really understanding the elements and all the
Yeah.
symbolism between and how we are the elements and we're also the cosmos and we're these two things at the same time. I was like, oh. And Lakota Dakotas are just so beautiful. Like I can't even say enough about there. But let me show you the bone. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. Like, see how it's like smooth right here? But
Exactly. It
then
would be
it,
smooth all the way down normally.
yeah, yeah. And so that's why if you could, it really just depends on the light
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it kind of like
Right.
dips in right here. I could put my thumb in it and it
Whoa.
fits like perfect.
Nice move.
Yeah. So, but that was one
Well,
of those weird things that I wasn't really
and
planning on.
that happens. I know people who have uh stabbing wounds.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
My
yeah,
friend George he still feels where he's got stabbed here. I have deltoid issues from wielding swords. I think it's from wielding heavy swords, right-handed. And then,
exactly.
just it's a lot, and it's not a big issue, but this is my weak spot right here.
Mm-hmm.
My
And you might have even
deltoid.
got like pierced there a few
Who
times or
knows?
something
Yeah.
like that.
Who knows?
Um,
Yeah.
I've worked on really quick. I was working on a client one time and I had been working with them, regularly. And there was a couple of times that these memories of a life where they were like, what do you call it? Like in war, and they were like one of those nurses or like a doctor,
Yeah.
and and there was this a lot of yeah, a lot of carnage. And in this life, it was like even though they didn't have that job, that was the role that they were taking in a lot of people's lives. I think sometimes, like you said, hearing and understanding a piece of a past life to help us get more peace in the present and
Right.
or understand ourselves a little better
Yeah.
is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And then the issue there could be um, developing a habit of helping and healing, uh, which is not necessarily doesn't sound like a bad thing, but if it's imbalanced for that individual, then that could actually cause them to suffer because I can't save the person because they're used to having these past life memories of trying to be a medic on a battlefield. And then they
Exactly.
cannot save the person because the person is blown up or who knows what. And now they're a nurse or whatever they are in the current lifetime in 21st century Earth, and they're having the same emotional response. So that's an example of how that memory could help the person today let go of the trauma and the almost the habit or the emotional pattern that was imprinted on their consciousness.
Yes, that's why I love like the concept of like cellular memory,
Yeah,
because it's the martyrdom syndrome, right? Or something along those lines, like the savior syndrome. Those of us that are in the helping field or givers and whatever, it's very important that we understand how to again put the oxygen mask on ourselves so that we can
yeah,
give to others
yeah.
and notice how it's a trauma thing and it could be a way that we're like getting our self-importance right and feeling powerful or meaningful even
Yeah.
though it's exhausting us
And
and
and it may feel very familiar because it may have been, let's just assume that it was from a past life. It's going to feel familiar, and familiar is generally more comfortable for people. But something like that, where you're so literally unable to save somebody's life because their leg was blown off in an ancient war or something, and you didn't have the ability to save them, and you're holding them as they die,
yes,
taking that into a present lifetime could be something that you could heal yourself from by realizing and acknowledging that that was then, this is now. That
yes,
that was my experience then, yes, but this is now, and this is not what I'm experiencing now in 21st century Earth, where somebody, you know, the limb can be saved or the life can be saved, maybe not the limb. Whereas
yes,
back then, you couldn't save anything, including
Yeah,
body.
and that kind of ties back to when you were saying like after we die, what hasn't been rectified or emotions and all that
Yeah,
memory bank of all of the stuff carries over with us. And if you felt a lot of shame and guilt for not being able to save people in this lifetime. You don't have that memory, right? But it's kind of in there. Like you're
yeah,
not recalling it. There's an
right, right,
amnesia around it, but
right.
there's that pull and that grip. And so that's another space and place where sometimes this stuff can come into play, but it can be tricky. And if you are in that space of wanting to navigate and have questions like again, Kelvin does free consultations and he might be able to help you through that process and even myself
Yes,
too, you
yeah.
know, understand it a little bit better, but I feel like you have a lot more expertise with that when it comes to, it's almost like surgical precision.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I'm not a therapist, but I
Yeah.
do have all this past life memory experience
Hmm.
and bring to I call it spiritual coaching. I can bring to the spiritual coaching session all of that experience that I've had and my familiarity with all of these various things that I've been through
Hmm.
in this lifetime,
Yeah.
you mentioned something earlier about that you couldn't see your face. I've had one experience where I could see my face. And I talk about it in my book, but I'll give people a kind of a brief kind of summary of it. Um, and this also goes to your question earlier in our session about like when can this past life stuff, when can it come up? This came up in when I was lying down resting after I meditated. And I was in a friend's living room. I can't remember if there were 5 or 6 of us meditating together. We had a group meditation. And then I laid down on the floor. And like we always do a rest period after the meditation, a transition period after the meditation. I'm lying on the floor. And then all of a sudden, this TV screen goes on in my mind, like a video screen goes on in my mind. And I'm walking. I don't see myself, my face first. I'm looking through my eyes, like in a dream. People have had those experiences in dreams before. You kind of see everything, in the dream. But I wasn't dreaming. I was just lying down resting. So I wasn't wide awake. I wasn't meditating, and I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't asleep, but I was in this in between state, right? And
Yeah.
the TV screen goes on. I'm walking into this room and I see this big stone room, like made of stones. The floor is big stone, like 2 foot, wide, 3 foot wide stone on the floor, the walls. I look up the ceiling and I scuba dive so I can tell like vertical heights, pretty easily. And it was, 30, 40 foot high ceiling way up there. And there was nobody in the room. And the furniture was all pushed to the walls for some reason, except there was one piece of furniture in the middle of the room. And it was a full-length mirror, big, huge full-length mirror, wooden mirror, with a wooden frame with a mirror on it. And I walked in and I walked to the mirror and I saw myself. And I was like, whoa. And I filled up the whole mirror. I was huge. I was a huge man, huge. And I had long red hair, a red beard, and I was in full length chainmail from my head to my toe. I had chainmail on and a white tunic with a cross on it. I was a crusader. And so I had this knowingness that that was me. And I saw my face, everything. I had this knowingness that that was me. Um, and then a millisecond later, I had doubt went through me. Like thought I was making it up. This happened to me like this is like the second past life memory that it was very early on. This is the happened. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, no, I'll make it. And I thought doubt. And then boom, this energy went from my feet up through my body, shot out my head with knowingness again. So it went knowingness, doubt, knowingness. But this energy was like a fire hose of energy which shot through me. Like the only time I remember having that much energy going through me was when I almost got electrocuted in a thunderstorm. I was working at a Boy Scout camp when I was a teenager, this lifetime. and I was putting hanging a metal saw back up on a metal hook, a metal nail that was nailed into a rafter. And when I was going back out to the truck at the Boy Scout camp, after this event happened, they said, "Oh, we just saw this lightning bolt came down, hit that tree, and jumped onto the building that you were just in." And it like went through into me, and I was like, my arm was like this. All my muscles tensed up, and I couldn't let go of the saw for like a split second, and then
And
so
then it like released itself.
yeah, then it released my muscles released because the energy because it
Yeah.
was if it had hit the building directly, I'd probably be dead. But it jumped from tree to tree to tree and then hit the building, and so yeah, that's the only energy thing that was remotely close to what I experienced when I had that knowingness, doubt, knowingness thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I feel like part of why you and I are in a state and place of the knowing and the knower versus the believer. You know
mm,
what I mean?
yeah,
Because there is a
a big
difference.
difference. Yeah,
It's yeah, there is because the other one, it's like an indestructible, unshakable, anchored in reality
yeah,
that even when the other side of our temporal self wants to make us think or feel something else, it's like, nope.
yeah,
Like it's like we really can't be upset about too much of anything. Like things can bother us, but we don't hold on to anything because right away it's almost in lightning speed. The
yeah,
inner over understanding as to why it's going on is there, at least enough of it to
yeah,
bring to keep us in a state of peace, you know?
yeah,
Or if we step out of it, like we could come right back into the PazMesa, which is like the center of the order and chaos. And it's in that space
right, right.
that really holds that the comfort that we're needing, even in those like uncertain times. If I don't know if we've covered everything we've wanted to with reincarnation. Because one of the questions that I had was, which religions adhere to it, which ones don't, like, that kind of thing. I don't know how important that is.
I think it's more interesting for people to know that regardless of religions, so many people have had memories that are just,
I
how do
know.
you explain some of this? So I talk about it, this book, my first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. I talk about the four belief systems. I think we've talked about this in an earlier session, but the bottom line is, different beliefs about death that kind of underlie the different religious and cultural beliefs about death and dying worldwide.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that what I find about the whole religious and cultural stuff about reincarnation is how it cuts across different religions and cultures. It's just it's this these whole experiences
Yeah.
of past lives and reincarnation that I talk about in chapter 11 in this book. Um, on page 111, I talk about the research at the University of Virginia Medical School and how there's 2,700 cases there of kids, mostly ages 2 to 5 years old, and they have these crazy memories. Well, not crazy, but they're not crazy. They're just
Incredible.
innocent memories. And want to hear this? You can Google this, and you'll see YouTube videos of this kid. He must be in his 20s now. He must be in his mid 20s right now. I'm guessing. But the 2-year-old child in Louisiana, the kid's name is James Leininger. So anybody's watching this, you want to look this up. James, I'll spell his last name, Leininger. Look him up on YouTube. There's tons of videos of this kid. But when he was 2 years old, he's from Louisiana. He's from a fundamentalist Christian family. They don't believe in reincarnation, right? And his father is very, very devout, so forth and fundamentalist Christian and so forth, Louisiana. But he wakes up and he's regularly as a 2-year-old child. Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out. This is what his mother is written and on YouTube videos talked about 4 to 5 times a night. This little kid's having these memories. And then she says, "Who are you talking about? Who's the little man?" He goes, "Me. I'm the little man." And then so later, his dad to ask him questions. Fast forward a bunch of weeks and months, finds out that this little boy is talking about his plane being shot down, and
Yes.
and then by the Japanese. And then his dad says, "How do you know they're Japanese?" He says, "Because of the big red sun." And the,
Yes, and he even remembered some. I remember seeing this. It's an incredible story.
yeah,
I think he ends up remembering his name and some of his
yeah,
friends.
his friends, his
Yeah,
GI Billy, Leon, and Walter.
yeah, fellow pilots or something like that. Yes,
They predeceased him. They were
yes,
pilots on the same aircraft carrier in the World War II South Pacific for the U.S. Navy. These were
yes,
Navy pilots.
yep.
And his three GI Joe dolls, he named them Billy, Leon, and Walter. His father, fast forward a year or two later, you looks it up in the archives, and yes, there was a Billy so and so, a Leon so and so, and a Walter so and so, who were U.S. Navy pilots who died in the Second World War on the exact same aircraft carrier that his son in
Was recalling.
Louisiana claims to have been on. Billy,
Yes,
Leon Connor, and Walter Devlin.
it's amazing.
His father finds that. And in this 2-year-old kid had matched his G.I. Joe dolls not only with the names, but the color of their hair. Billy was dark hair, Leon was blonde, and Walter had red hair. Okay. And so all the G.I. Joes matched, da 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 da. There's all this stuff. You can read this in here or go to the, YouTube and check it out. But what's not in my book, because I didn't find this out till later, is this story about this kid going when he was, I can't remember if he was a teenager or 12 years old or something. I think he was 12 or something. So
Hmm.
about 13 years ago or something. He goes to a an award ceremony for the Nimitz Museum. So this young kid who's now like 12 years old or something goes there with his parents because there's going to be an award there for the aircraft carrier that he was on in the Second World War. Okay. There were still some survivors from
Hmm.
that aircraft carrier alive today. And they were at that time for this award ceremony in their 90s, mid 90s. Okay. Very advanced in age. They get out of their car, and this little boy, James Leininger, says to his parents, "Oh my God, there's Jimmy. There's Saul. They look so old." He remembers them when they were 20 and 18 years old in the Second World War on the aircraft carrier with him before he died.
Yeah, I mean, like, how do you can't even make that up. And this also reminds me of a book that I read that also opened my mind to all of this too. And it's I think his name is Dr. Newton. Yeah, it's called his name is Michael Newton. He wrote a book called Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls, and he was doing regression work. Also, if I'm not mistaken, he didn't believe in anything either, nothing, you know what I mean? He wasn't this like very spiritual person. As he was regressing them, some of them were going into the between life space,
Mm,
and there was enough clients that it was happening to. Going back to what you were saying, they were all coming from different religious backgrounds, some of them not believing in anything, different ages, different races, different gendered, all of this stuff, right? And yet as he was looking at the data, there was a lot of cross referencing and a lot of similarities that it was almost impossible for him to ignore. And he ended up writing a book about it, which this could be a good segue into that, because some people wonder about soul contracts and soulmates and things like that that are unresolved on the other side. And maybe that could be one of the subjects that we touch on in the next
sure,
episode.
sure. Sounds
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
Yeah. And then we'll see where that leads us because there's still
yeah,
so much to cover. We mentioned last time on one of the other episodes how to handle like suicide type deaths and
yeah.
our thought, some of the information that we can provide for people on that and how to best support people who have lost someone through suicide.
I've helped people who've lost loved ones through murder,
Mm,
suicide,
yeah. I feel
terrible
like,
things.
yeah, those very unexpected,
Unexpected.
catastrophic deaths.
Yeah, they're not, it's not illness, it's not a car accident, it's intentional by another human being
Hmm.
or themselves.
Yes. and how that ties to like forgiveness. And we can
Yeah.
even touch on
Talk
what
about
is that like, because that can be sensitive for a lot of people and that sort of thing.
yeah.
So maybe that's where we'll leave off for now. And yeah, I want to remind people too that they can go to your website and schedule consultations and connect with you on your social media pages and your YouTube pages.
Substack I have a new Substack. It's called Turning Within, but they can just Google my name, Kelvin Chin, on Substack, and they can find me and subscribe. It's free to subscribe to my new Substack publication, where I talk about all this stuff there.
Yeah, we definitely want to support you in whatever way we can. And this is just one small way that we can do that. And you may not agree with everything that we're saying here, but if this resonates with you, be sure to share it with somebody you feel that could benefit from some of this information if your heart is called to do that. And of course, you can always leave comments in the comment section here on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe, and looking forward to doing another episode with you, Kelvin. Thanks again for your time, energy, and attention.
Yeah.
And to everybody who has been watching and tuning in, we want to thank you as well. You know, it's all about finding that peace within. So peace be in you, everybody. Peace be in PazMesa.
Thank you for watching Good Grief, meeting loss with presence one wave at a time. Be sure to subscribe to Rise Above TV and tune in for the next episode, where we'll share more insights about grief so you can face it mindfully.